Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Chapter 18, the urinary system. We're going to dive right in because there's a lot of information to cover, and I only have 15 minutes to do it in. So, your urinary system consists of two kidneys, two ureters, a urinary bladder, and a urethra. The functions of the urinary system as a whole is going to be to eliminate waste from blood, and that waste product we know as urine. In fact, 1,200 milliliters of blood will pass through the kidneys each minute. The remaining structures, so your ureters, the bladder, and the urethra, are all meant to help hold and therefore eliminate urine or the waste. Other functions of the kidneys, we're going to regulate blood volume, electrolyte content, and pH balance. And we do that by either excreting or conserving each of those things. So the more water we have in the body, the more we can excrete it. The more electrolytes, same thing, the more basic we are, the more we can go ahead and release that alkaline material. On the flip side, if we don't have enough, we're going to conserve water, electrolytes, and pH. We also will do the same thing within tissue fluid. A perfect example is our muscle fatigue lab. When we built up that lactic acid, you increase the pH balance in the muscular tissue. Blood picks up that acid and will filter it out of the body. So we're not just talking what the blood is naturally carrying. We're also going to regulate blood pressure with the secretion of the enzyme known as renin, which causes vessels to constrict and therefore raise your blood pressure. Very similar to vasoconstriction and vasodilation that we saw in chapter 12. We're going to regulate blood cell production with the secretion of erythropoietin, which releases blood oxygen levels, which is released when blood oxygen levels decrease. Our friends that summited Mount Everest, this is what their bodies were experiencing. The less oxygen they had available, the more blood cells they produced to pick up as much oxygen as possible. And lastly, we're going to convert vitamin D, which hopefully you're all getting because we're trapped indoors as best we can, into its most active form known as calciferol. Your kidneys are located in the upper abdominal cavity on either side of your vertebral column. In fact, they're lateral to your spine. They're anchored to the posterior wall of your abdomen by the peritoneum, also called your retroperitoneal tissue. They're embedded in fat or adipose tissue, which is meant to act as a cushion. And that adipose tissue is then covered by fibrous connective tissue known as renal fascia. We've seen the fascia used multiple times. We saw it on muscle. In this case, however, it's not just a protective layer. It's meant to help keep the kidneys structurally in place so they don't jostle around with normal body movement. The kidneys are slightly different in the sense that the right kidney is slightly lower than the left, and this is because of the presence of the accessory organ of digestion, the liver. However, each kidney has an indentation on the medial side known as the hilum. The hilum is that notch which gives it its actually kidney type shape. Here's where we see the renal artery enter and the renal vein and the ureter exit the kidney. Internal to the kidneys, as you can see, there's a lot going on. We're going to talk about the most important pieces for now, the layers. The outermost layer is known as the renal cortex. The renal cortex, if we looked at dissection, would be reddish in color. It extends from the capsule to the pyramids, and it consists of renal corpuscles and convoluted tubules that are part of the nephron. We're going to talk about the nephron next time, but it's important to note that the nephron is the smallest functional piece of the kidney, meaning this is the smallest piece in which filtration of blood will take place. The inner layer of the kidney is known as the renal medulla. Again, in terms of dissection, it'd be reddish brown in color. This is going to consist of the loops of Henle and collecting ducts, both of which are a part of the nephron that we'll talk about next time. So renal cortex, outer layer, renal medulla, M for middle layer. When we look at the renal medulla, we see those nice triangular type structures on the inside. These are your renal pyramids. They're wedge-shaped pieces, which are made of tubules as well as blood vessels, and the tip of each pyramid is known as the renal apex or the renal papilla. For our study, we're going to know it as the renal papilla. Within that same renal medulla, we see funnel-shaped extensions of the renal pelvis known as calyces, or calyx for singular. It's going to enclose that tip of each pyramid, or the papillae, and it's going to have two different sizes, a minor calyx, those nice red rectangles, or the major calyx, that gray square. Urine's going to flow from the renal papilla, or that tip of that pyramid, into the minor calyx, then the major calyx, and then off to the largest funnel, which is the renal pelvis, that nice green rectangle there. The renal pelvis is simply a cavity formed from expansion of the ureter as it enters into the kidney through that hilum, or that indent. The ureters, again, we are programmed for two, a left and a right, are descending tubes from the hilum, so that indent of the kidneys, to the posterior or backside of the urinary bladder. They're both made of smooth muscle, meaning we cannot control them, and they're covered in transitional epithelium. Transitional meaning many different shapes of cells. Their job as ureters is to transport urine from the renal pelvis inside the kidney to the urinary bladder for storage through peristaltic waves, so those nice wave-like motions. So if you were upside down doing a handstand, this would still function. In the middle of the night when you're all contorted and sleeping, this is the reason why we're still able to move urine from the kidneys to the bladder. When we look at the bladder in and of itself, it's a nice muscular sac that acts as a reservoir or a containing area for urine until it's time to contract and eliminate it from the body. It consists of transitional epithelium, so again, many different shapes of cells, which is important because it will allow the bladder to expand without tearing. So you might feel like you're going to burst, but you're not going to. When empty, however, the bladder is going to contain folds known as rugae, really similar to what we saw inside the stomach. They're there, that way the bladder can expand. The lower part of the bladder, however, has no rugae in an area known as the trigone, so that nice upside down triangle. The reason being, the trigone is formed from the two openings at the posterior side, the ureters, and the one opening toward the bottom known as the urethra. This area will not change in shape or in size. The urinary bladder also has three muscular layers, and all of them are smooth muscle. You do not control them. These muscles are known as detrusor muscles, which is a fancy way of saying they form a circle or a sphere. When your detrusor muscles contract, they become smaller, and therefore they release the volume on the inside, so volume is lower. Around the opening of the urethra, we see the first of two sphincters, which would be your internal urinary sphincter. This is involuntary, meaning you don't control it. If you have to go and you're not at a bathroom, you need to make your way there. But good news, we've got an additional doorway, which we'll talk about here. The urethra as a whole is a small, thin-walled tube which transports urine from the bladder to the exterior of the body through those same wave-like motions, peristalsis. The external urinary sphincter is made of skeletal muscle. This is the doorway that's voluntary. So if you have to go, this is what you can pinch off until you are at the bathroom. The urethra, hopefully we all know and understand, is very different males versus females because of the structures we are working with. In females, it's about a 1 to an inch and a half long tube located anterior or toward the front of the vagina. In males, it's about 7 to 8 inches long. Because it has to pass through the prostate gland, then the urogenital diaphragm, where it enters the penis and will extend from the beginning all the way to the end. The male urethra is overly important because it functions in both urinary and reproductive systems. However, fun fact, it cannot do both at the same time. That is not a challenge. That's just scientific fact. The urination reflex, fancy way of saying expelling urine from the bladder. Not scientifically known as urination. Instead, it's known as micturition. This is a response to involuntary and voluntary impulses, particularly the detrusor muscles contracting and that external urinary sphincter relaxing so you can release the contents within. Your bladder can hold as much as 800 milliliters or more. This is depending upon the individual. When volume reaches between 200 and 400 milliliters, nerve impulses get sent up to the spine, which is why this is known as a reflex, and it causes you the feeling that you have to go. This is why If you're on a road trip with your family, some family members have to find a restroom every hour on the hour, and other people are able to go a few stops before they need to use the restroom. Everyone's bladder is different and everyone gets signals differently. Here's a nice little link if you would like an additional view of the micturition reflex. Go ahead and click it. Enjoy. Otherwise, last thing we need to talk about is the characteristics of urine. There are many, first of which is the amount. Normal urinary output in 24 hours, so one day, is between 1 and 2 liters. Excessive sweating or fluid intake will increase or decrease output respectively. So if you're sweating, you've got diarrhea, you're releasing too much liquid, you're probably going to have lower urinary output because the body is trying to hold on to as much water as possible. On the flip side, if you are very saturated in water or fluid, or you've been consuming alcohol, this increases the output. You are very saturated. You're trying to get rid of what the body doesn't need. Color. Color is typically yellow due to the breakdown of bile. In fact, it's normal. It's known as a straw or amber color, and it's more concentrated or more yellow depending on how much bile is present. It can be clear in appearance also if you are, again, very saturated in liquids. We also see specific gravity. The normal range is about 1.010 to 1.025, and this is simply a measurement of the dissolved materials in urine. So if you had a multivitamin that day, or you're really good about eating your dark leafy greens, you're probably going to get rid of more dissolved materials. Another characteristic is pH. It usually ranges between 4.6 and 8.0, so we say the average value is about 6.0. Diet immediately affects pH of urine. In fact, if you are a vegetarian or a vegan, in fact, and you have more veggies in your diet, your urine is more basic. If you are like our friend Coach Garcia, where we see a high intake of red meat, you are more acidic in terms of your pH of urine. Constituents, or the makeup of the actual liquid. 95% of urine is water. The other 5% is salts and other waste products. In fact, here's where we see nitrogenous wastes. So nitrogen products are formed by the liver, and we've got 3 of them. We've got urea, creatinine, and uric acid. Urea is from amino acid metabolism, so that nice breakdown for muscles. We also see actual muscular tissue metabolism with creatinine, and then for nucleic metabolism, we see the uric acid. We got through that in 13 minutes. Huzzah! Next time, we're definitely going to talk about the nephrons. So in terms of the renal cortex and renal medulla, don't get too lost in those terms just yet. We'll talk about them next time. Otherwise, make sure if you have any questions, you let me know, and we'll dive into section 2 of the urinary system next time.